everybody. Welcome back to Signal Flow. I'm your host for today, Ben Thomas. When you look at the world of mission critical versus commercial installation, there's a lot of things that we have to consider as a community, especially from an IT standpoint. And one of the things that you've seen kind of from a manufacturer's side of the world is that folks are trying to find ways to either repurpose or reapply some of their existing technology into mission critical spaces, whether that's displays, whether that's KVMs, whether that's infrastructure and cabling in the IT side of the world. So it's important for us to have a conversation today to kind of make a distinction between the two, because there's a lot of different considerations that the mission critical side of the world has versus traditional installation. So I wanted to bring on a cybersecurity expert today and an infrastructure expert to help walk through that with us. And that's Wayne Dorris from Access Communications. Wayne, thanks so much for coming on today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. We're excited to have you and have this conversation. And Wayne, the first question is going to be this. I kind of mentioned it a little bit in at the beginning segment here, but our community sometimes has a challenge drawing the distinction between the mission critical side of the world and the commercial installation side of the world. And as we kind of frame our conversation today, it's important to set the stage in there. Could you talk about some of the differences, especially from an IT and infrastructure side? What are some of the considerations from mission critical standpoint that maybe commercial installations don't have to quite meet the standards for?
Yeah, a lot of it is, and I thank you for that question. We develop product. It can be used in both cases, but what will happen in a mission critical environment is the vetting process will be very different. They will want to understand what compliances that the product may have, and then they'll also really want to study the hardening guide aspect of your product, because they're going to be applying many more aspects for that for their security baseline. If we looked at base cybersecurity baselines between the two, obviously there's a higher set of requirements for anything that's mission critical. So, that's part of it. The other part of it is that you will probably have to go through a lot more testing. Usually where we run into this in federal government environments, type of stuff, you will have to actually go to a test lab, demonstrate that it'll actually work on their pre-production offline system, and ensure that the integrations, ensure that all the protocols that you're working will work. So yeah, the bar is much higher when you get to that environment. And so yeah, you're going to have to not only on the product side, they're also going to look at you as the cybersecurity posture of your organization as well. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little later, but that's definitely a difference.
We will, and you mentioned one of the places that applies is the government side of the world, but mission critical can also include things like air traffic control, network operations centers, security operations centers, access control management, things like that. So really places where you actually are in no-fail zones, and you literally can't have gear that's going to fail you, right? But you also have a lot of these hardening requirements that have to happen as well. And I want to kind of ask really on a high level too, especially from the IT and cybersecurity side of the world, what are some of the common vulnerabilities typically that you see in some of these maybe mission critical installations? And what are some of the ways that, whether it's through infrastructure building or technology or product, that you're seeing folks on the mission critical side of the world really address a lot of those?
Sure. Yeah. So Access participated in the Thought Labs report of 2022, and we were part of a group that sent out a survey to 1,000 CISOs worldwide, and we wanted to understand what was the root cause of an actual breach. And the three basic things came back. Of course, there was human error at 50%, which makes sense. This is you keeping people from clicking on things in your organization. But what's interesting is quickly after that, you have misconfiguration of devices at 44%, and then poor maintenance and patching at 43%. So when we look at the recent Mandiant M report, which came out earlier this year in 2023, the initial infection vector, we see exploitation of vulnerabilities at 32%, which leaded phishing, which was only 22%, by 10%. So really, the basis here is what we're getting down to is vulnerability exploitation is the common theme. And so what we see differently, say, between regular commercial, is we will see whether they're vulnerability scanning or patching will be at a much, say they apply patches every 30 days, 45 days, et cetera, based on, when a manufacturer has a patch to put in. But in the in the mission critical environment, I see where they are scanning every day, and they usually they can even have stuff like within 24, 48 hours we expect a patch, but usually a lot of that is 7 days, 14 days at the latest. The reason being you're relying on these systems. But what really makes the difference is when you're going to be working in that space, they are going to be evaluating a vendor's product for their software development lifecycle, their vulnerability policy, and their vulnerability policy according to third-party software packages. And this is where we saw recent developments in software bill of materials. This is where we saw Executive Order 14028, where they were saying, hey, if we're in mission critical, we have to understand when we buy an Access product, we're buying Access software and firmware as part of that product. But what also am I buying as part of that software? Well, I'm buying Apache, OpenSSL. I'm buying all these other third-party components. And so they want to have a repository or a list of these things at time of procurement so that they understand what all they're buying under the hood. But let's go back to the software development lifecycle, because if you're really going to stop these things in the development phase, one of the things you're going to want to look at is what is their security development model. In other words, as they're producing software, they should have documentation. Like at Access, we have our Access security development model. It's on our website. You will see, okay, this is where we do an assessment, we threat model, we're going to do static code analysis, pen testing, bug bounty programs, all of these things that we're trying to do as a mature vendor to ensure that we're producing products with as less vulnerability as we can. So, and it's important for when you're choosing products to understand that product's life cycle through the whole thing, and that's from development to production to onboarding to while it's in maintenance, keep it going. And then also a very important aspect is decommissioning, ensuring that you're taking out all of the critical information that's in that device, particularly if it's been deployed in a mission critical environment.
Well, Wayne, that was an incredible answer. There's so much to unpack there. I'm going to put a pin in the staffing side and human error side. We'll come back to that in a minute. But I love how you kind of focused on that product development and installation side of the world, right? Especially from the cybersecurity, whether that's software management, cloud management, whatever. That process is so important from an installation side, right? So if I'm an IT manager, I have to have products, and obviously this is part of the procurement process as well, but I have to have access to products that I know are going to work. How do you, well, not only do they have to work, but they have to be easy to use. How do you balance that need for maybe usability and functioning with obviously the hardening and the security side of that world?
Yeah, it's so I'll say, particularly from our perspective at Access, right? The hardening aspect changes, and this is one of the reasons. Sometimes when we see people say, "Oh, well, your default configuration is too open," right? But the point is, we don't know if the product is going to end up in a retail convenience store. Same said product potentially can end up in mission critical, a nuclear plant, whatever. So the point is the hardening guide shows you there's a lot of different parts that you can apply. And that should also be lined up with whatever your IT security baseline policy is for that environment. So the idea is, oh, okay, if you're doing, you might be able to accept self-signed certificates in that lower, C-store environment just to provide encryption, but you're not really worried about authentication. But on the other side, right, in the mission critical, we're going to want to see, do you support Active Directory? How do we manage certificates? We're going to manage our own C8 certificates. Obviously, we're not going to trust a self-signed certificate. So when you really have to look at the hardening guides and align those with the policies into the environment that they're going. And so you want to take the time to ensure if we choose this product, can I sufficiently add the hardening controls that are very similar to what they're using in IT to this product?
Yeah, and that's an interesting spot to be in, right? Because whether you're a traditional integrator, whether you're maybe someone as a manufacturer who's trying to create products and make products that are going to fit in mission critical environments, those are considerations that you have to take into place, right? And from an IT manager perspective, right? How does that look a little bit different from maybe the traditional commercial installation side of the world, right? Obviously, we know that whether it's air gaps, whether it's lockdown security, multi-factor, there's a lot of different things that you have to consider and implement on the mission critical side from an IT standpoint. But what are some of the things from a product procurement and selection side of the world that a lot of these folks are taking into consideration? What are some of the ways on the manufacturer side really that you can help be proactive and prescriptive to a lot of these folks, maybe who are less familiar with the actual product implementation side?
Yeah, there's, if you looked at our website for our tactical resources that we have under cybersecurity, again, you're going to see here's our access security development model, which is our SDLC. You're going to have our vulnerability policy, and there will also be the vulnerability policy for us and for third-party packages. You're going to see guidelines for how to use our product with security scanners like Nessus, Rapid7, whatever you may have, so that if you're scanning the product, that there will be some things that will show up. These are the common things that you're going to get every time. So the biggest thing is if a vendor doesn't have a comprehensive program, and it's easy for you to provide documentation that they've said, here's our hardening aspects, here's how it works with vulnerability guides, this is what we do in development, these are all the products and features, and these are ways that you can help harden the product. Those are the things you have to look for. And then as an integrator, it's really, you may be forced, if the end customer obviously forces that to you, but it's also an opportunity for you to differentiate if you're working with regular commercial clients and asking these questions, saying, hey, what is your encryption policy? Do you encrypt all your data going back and forth? It can really provide a differentiator for you as a value add to the service that you're providing to your client.
Oh, Wayne, I want to circle back to one of the things that you mentioned earlier. I think it was 50% of breaches are caused by human error. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that was what we got back in 2022. Now, this is human error, meaning this is phishing. Somebody clicked on something they didn't mean to. Those kinds of things. Credentials have gotten stolen off another website, et cetera. So,
Well, and that is, look, that's just staggering, right? I mean, maybe it's good to know that about half of the breaches or compromisations. I don't know if that word. Half of the compromises are coming from that human error and not the product side. But how, especially from an implementation standpoint, right? Let's use a network operations center for an example, right? Very operator driven, obviously leveraging a lot of technologies like AI, maybe for detection of weapons or unauthorized entry, things like that. There's a lot of that happening in the background, but there is a role that operator has to play, right? How important is that operator experience in helping eliminate maybe some of these human errors? And we talked about phishing, right? That is maybe not the best example right now, but from an actual operator standpoint, what are some of the ways that we can help as a community empower folks, whether it's through product design or software design, to prevent some of those human errors?
right. So one of the most critical aspects is most products will have a syslog or support remote syslog. One of the most important conversations, obviously, if they have in that SOC environment, if they have a CM or source system, security orchestration and response, or security incident event management platform, a lot of it, they will be running AI on the syslog databases. So a lot of times what I see, particularly from our products, for critical IT environments and for what they're doing, if it's critical to the business to make money, yeah, those things all get integrated. And then they go, well, I have all this other stuff. I have my AV system, my video surveillance system, my physical access control. Sometimes those logs because they say, well, that's under physical security's side. A lot of times those logs don't end up in the same repository. So they don't have the advantage of being monitored or to be able to understand, hey, there is an incident or an environment, and roll that into the systems that the SOC is actually watching. So the first part, is for that. The second thing, when we look at SOC, let's face it, if you're a IT administrator, you have your the one thing I think that the network is completely changing, right? You have people bringing their own cell phones. You have public environments, so your network's never really static, right? But the idea is you have so many more things under your responsibility that secure enrollment, so that a device can announce, hey, I'm this type of device. And this is where we see with zero trust, right? That basically I understand what this device is. Okay, I understand this is my provisioning policy for that device. And then I can get another certificate for it. And now I can put it onto my production network, whether that's mission critical or, standard business. So the idea is that the admin doesn't have time to by hand ensure that we make these things happen. And so this is where we're seeing automation being a critical key to apply those baselines, ensure that the configurations are correct, and that as per a policy, I understand what's on my network. And then that information gets rolled into the SOC.
Wayne, I got to be honest, I'm still blown away by the 50% number. I think it is
Well, it shouldn't surprise you, right? If you look at the amount of cybercrime in 2022 is $6 trillion worldwide, right? So if we look at that based on world economies, that would be the third largest world economy, right behind US and China. So this is a reason why people are like, why do I get all these weird emails? Why do I get all these weird, phishing texts? Because they're like, hey, I just cast this huge net. Somebody's going to do something, and that's the way that it works. So, and as soon as
and that's the reason why we have to have this conversation, right? Not
yeah,
only from the IT professional standpoint, where you're worried about physical security and access hardening, of an actual mission critical installation, but also that you're training your operators, you're training your folks on your team to be aware of things that are more and more every day, more convincing than they've ever been from a phishing standpoint and things like that. And it's so important for us to have this conversation too, even from the context of the larger AV and integrated technology industries at large, because these are conversations as you look at. I hate to be like this guy, right? But as you look at deep fakes and AI continuing to find ways to help us, there are also ways it can hurt us, right? So we have to have these conversations as a larger community, because we don't always have the answers, right? And with that in mind, I want to kind of ask, when you think about whether it's an AV manufacturer standpoint, an IT manager, or even all the way up to a CIO, CSO, what are some of the considerations that folks who may be finding their way into hardened security, mission critical security, control rooms, things like that? What are some of the considerations, and what are some of the steps that they could take to continue to improve their education and maybe applications of some of their systems?
Yeah, obviously the education aspect. It's interesting because if you work anywhere in cybersecurity, yeah, it's a dedication to endless learning, because the attacks are always changing, the environment's always changing, networks are changing. So you have to continually educate yourself. But there's lots of different organizations, SANS, ISC Squared. There's lots of places where you can get education, and a lot of it for free. I like ISC Squared. They have a newer, kind of more introductory certification called cybersecurity. It's called the CC certification. I can't remember what the second C is, but it's a very base entry level cert. But the idea is go and get this education, because particularly if you've dealt mostly with commercial, you probably haven't been. If you've done small medium business, you may not be pushed a lot on the these are what we need for a product or an environment. So. The other thing is, because you may be working with certificates, you need to understand if they're using different trust structures, Active Directory, whatever they're the different protocols for that. just so that you can understand, even though you may not be implementing that trust structure, but you have a device that has to implement to it. So it's good for you to understand the language and the jargon so that if you're having a problem getting a product integrated into that environment, you can understand this is exactly what I need from that administrator. You don't have to be the expert on, certificate trust systems, but you at least have to be competent enough to know. In the security industry, we actually, I work on SIA's Cybersecurity Advisory Board, and we introduced this SICC credential, which is a Security Integrator Cybersecurity certification. And with that, it's aimed at a base tech at 2 years to demonstrate that you have basic knowledge of mostly how to, if you have a hardening guide, how to implement things in hardening guides for that. And the reason being, a lot of times in procurement, you may have such said superstar with all of these different certifications, but is that the guy actually on the job that's going to put it in? And that's why we kind of wanted to look at a something that isn't, okay, I don't need to be a CISSP or some other higher certification here, but the fact that the person actually doing the job has a basic fundamental knowledge of cybersecurity. So those are some places to start, getting educated.
Well, and that's incredibly helpful and impactful for folks, right? Especially as we start to see more and more of our enterprise installations, our enterprise IT setups approach maybe some more of those mission critical best practices and protocols from a hardening standpoint. So, Wayne, look, the insight and the thoughts you've given to us really today have been invaluable, and I know I've already learned a lot, and I could speak for our audience too. There's a lot of folks out there really hearing and learning a lot of this for the first time. So, I appreciate you coming on, being willing to share some of this information, and chatting with us today on Signal Flow.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to Signal Flow on Avixa TV and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Stay tuned. We'll see you next time.